Let me say something about the electrical metaphor. But my understanding more and more is that when we work at the altar, and especially with sacraments, that we're working with an energy. In religious language, that's the Holy Spirit, or you might say it's grace. But we feel this presence and we feel it move through us, and sometimes to the point where it rattles us physically. So in my own talks about energy, when I use that example, I try to make it clear that we're not talking about the kind of energy that comes out of a wall socket, but we are talking about energy. And even though the energy of spirit is different, it's of a higher order of energy, but it operates according to the same laws. For me, I work with it all the time. And there's, you have current, you have the movement of energy, you have the potential, which is like the voltage, you have the resistance, which is, we all know what resistance is. But there are other things like induction, where one person who has a lot of spirit comes in contact with somebody else. There's a transfer. That's darshan. That's what they call darshan. And capacitance. Now I'm skirting the borders of my own. I wish Matthias was here because he knows a lot more about this. But we have a capacity for how much spirit we can hold. So for me, the metaphor it starts at literal, goes through metaphor, and back to literal.
The best metaphors are really speaking of something that's literally, factually experienced. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's right. And our language goes dead when we lose the connection to reality. That's why so much abstract language, like the language of like a highly abstract language of, say, scholastic theology, that it can be quite wonderful if you keep it rooted.
So often we argue outside of ourselves, and we want to state things and as an impersonal reality to win arguments. And it gets us outside of ourselves. I try to keep it within human experience. We use the word energies. I mean, that's a valuable word.
Yeah, but one of my grad school teachers was the Episcopal lay theologian Sally McFague, who was well known for developing quote unquote metaphorical theology. And Sally was a great person and a great teacher, but I really got concerned about her project because it was like none of it was tied to anything. I mean, it was just like metaphors for God that you just could come up with out of whatever. And it's how does that ever get tied back to reality? And she'd say, well, some things don't work. Like you wouldn't say God is a washerwoman, and like, but how do you know what doesn't work if you've pulled everything loose and it's all just imagination that honestly most of the time seem to say more about the agendas of the people putting forward these metaphors than it did about any expression of the tradition or of living religious experience. It was more like, well, I'm wedded to this social political project, and it seems to me like we could
no washerwomen in my world.
we could put the divine force behind it by like creating an image of God that sort of serves that purpose. And it seemed manipulative fundamentally and disconnected from like the electrical stuff from Father Paul actually it works for me because it's a language that talks about something that's tangible and that's experienced, and when somebody begins to sort of enter into those experiences, you got to find a language to express what the heck is going on and how is this happening, and that comes pretty close.
On top of that, John, what do you think about the computer metaphors now? I mean, I've drifted into that a little bit, and talking about the soul, for instance, being our operating system that proceeds out of the mind of God. That in the order we learned that the soul runs the body, and so that to me that's a real close analogy or metaphor for the soul itself, because it takes care of all of those internal processes, and much more than that, of course. But it seems to fit. And then of course you have the hard drive and the RAM or the temporary memory, and just the ability to hold or to embody reality in terms of processor capability. you know. So, but I have heard people criticize the computer analogy is flawed. So what do you guys think of that? Is that as useful as, say, the electrical analogy? Or
it's the world that people younger than us live in and see everything in. So, I mean, I worry a bit that it loses a bit of humanity, but then you could say the same thing about the electrical point of view. But I mean, like anybody who's under 30, their entire world has been encased in the world of
it's their
computer systems
house.
from birth.
It's their house, and you have to kind of learn how to speak the language of the house. But there is, there might be a usefulness to the electrical language that maybe is not quite there in the computer, and that is that first of all, electrical phenomena actually are out there in the world. Like there's when we see lightning hit the ground, and the laws of electromagnetism are analog. Like they correspond to, like, you're describing real phenomena out there that aren't fragmented. And being able to grasp something, this concept of, like, electric current, but also in induction and the induction of a magnetic field around electric current, you're having to think in a it compels you to think in a higher order way, because you're having to hold multiple concepts simultaneously that have dimension and that invoke the dimensioning powers of the human imagination. With computers, though, everything is digitized. And I mean, we have our devices, but in the computer world, everything can be infinitely fragmented, reblended, tossed together, fictionalized. It's so much on the surface, and there's no correlation between what we see in terms of output and what's actually going on under the surface. That's not true with electricity, with magnetism, with these, and with the laws that describe them. So my observation of the young people these days is that our capacity for sustained thinking is being ruined by the attack on the power of attention, but it's also being, our capacity to think is being damaged by the attack that's happening on the ability to see essence, to see what a thing is, like, because now, living in a world where it's so much, everything's mediated through images so much, and look at AI generated art. It's just it's a gigantic database of every image that's ever been uploaded to to Google, and things are kind of put together. And so, what is a thing? Like, what is a woman? What is anything? Is it just all the secondary? Is a thing just a combination of all of all the externals that conventionally make it up? If you change one external thing, does that mean it's a totally different thing? I mean, in a way that brings us back to old arguments and old discussions from the Middle Ages. But I just, at the pastoral level, I've also observed that folks are losing the capacity to see the symbolism, like to see the living metaphor in nature, to see and feel what underlies symbol. It seems to me that we're very much lost in a world where everything is just a feeble sign, like a token of something else, but not a living symbol, a living sign of realities that are in, with, and under. And that, like, gets us to the issue of sacrament in a really
right. Yeah. Where in the sacrament, like the symbol, the image actually is what it represents, and
exactly
and conveys that effectively. It's
Before we segue into that, I would like to touch on this new chat AI as metaphor that might not be just a metaphor, but there's a kind of a brutal aspect to it, because we're looking at a large language model that just predicts, right? It predicts what will logically cohere in any given context. And there's part of awakening spiritually is coming to grips with one's own limitations and one's own blindness to the real, right? The blindness to God. And when I work with ChatGPT and I'm having to engineer my prompts, in more and more elaborate ways, it starts to dawn on me that, most of the time I am not much more than a large language model. That kind of hurts,
Yeah.
And then when I deal with people, in real life, I'm thinking, wow, that's all they are, and to go beyond, so what's beyond that? Because like we have such a huge processing speed that our words, our dialogue forms instantly. It seems to come out of nowhere. As fast as ChatGPT can generate a response, we're generating our own words. So it's scarily similar, that the brain, being a physical organism, which is doing all the processing, I mean, we can get lost in that and start to think that's all there is. That's where we become our thoughts, right? We become our mind. And we lose the sense of that we are more than our thoughts. We are more than our mind. What are we? So I don't know. To me, this emergence of this new technology might bring people to that realization. As they work with artificial intelligence, they're going to have to own up to their own artificial intelligence.
No, nobody wants to own up to anything. I'm not even sure that by the time that's observable, I think most people's capacity to own up is going to be destroyed. I'm actually pretty. I mean, first of all, I don't believe in artificial intelligence. I think that I believe that intelligence, reason, it's the likeness of God, and we can't make that. We might be able to make something that can mimic the reproduce in very complex ways the appearances of spirit, but
I just want to be a real boy.
God can do that. God can do that. We can't do that. And there's no power lower than God that can do that, But
I see what you're pointing at. Like, I mean, Swedenborg was always big on this, that a lot of we have a lot of what we think are our thoughts or our feelings are not. They're just a sea in which we're swimming, and we identify with all of this stuff that's moving through us, but that's not us. I mean, like maybe some of them are, but a lot of it is just, this sea of information and sea of feelings and reactions and sympathies and antipathies that we're just kind of rolling through, and yet we think it's us.
Yeah. Well, Master Subramanya, the American Hindu master, he touched on that at great depth. He says that we're nothing more than a point of awareness, and we travel in the mind from one area of the mind to the other. If we think we're going to be sad, we go to that area of the mind that's always sad, and get the point.
Then,
so
if we dig down into this, it's all such a huge, inexplicable thing. The human, like the interiority of the human being. I just don't know where do we come from? Where are we going? Why are we here? I'm sorry.
Is it Pandora's box?
No, I mean it's like I'll go back and I think I go back and read my dissertation when I'm feeling down. When I'm feeling stupid, I'll go back and read my dissertation.